the Tennessee Lady Vols. They have added Syracuse transfer Alyssa Latham. She was a freshman this past year, and she is a forward. Appeared in all 32 games, started 26 of them. You talked last week about how if they're going to make any sort of run, they really need to upgrade their roster. What are your thoughts about Alyssa Latham committing to the Tennessee Lady Vols?
Well, I think it's significant. There's no question that new coach Kim Caldwell has to drastically revamp her roster. Um, she plays a different style of game than for which this roster was recruited. So, yeah, I'm not an expert on Syracuse women's basketball. I didn't watch it at all this year, but I've seen it in the past, and it usually played up tempo. I noticed Syracuse averaged like 75 point something per game. So I assume they're playing a fairly fast tempo. I don't think she would have added somebody that was especially sluggish running up and down the court. So uh, I used to think it was significant when you signed a transfer with a number of years left, not just a one and done graduate student. But now with the new NCAA rules that you can transfer an unlimited amount of time, I don't think that makes as much difference. It's a year by year basis. But she's a 6'2" player. So she had decent stats at Syracuse. So should fit in well with the Lady Vols. She still needs to add some other players, I think.
Yeah, I think this actually happened, and I don't think it was a coincidence. This happened the same weekend Karoline Striplin entered the transfer portal. And I think you mentioned her specifically as was not going to be a fit for what Kim Caldwell wants to do.
No, and I'm sure she'll land somewhere else and fit into a style of play that's more conducive to her skill set. Um, I mean, she was a contributor in the old system, but I just don't think she fit this one. I was curious about Tess Darby is staying. She's not especially quick, but she is a really good 3-point shooter. Be interested to see how, if you want to play an up-tempo game and shoot a lot of threes, okay, you need players that can really run, and you also need players that can shoot threes. So sometimes you may lean on one skill more than the other in balancing out your lineup. But you know how it works when a fast break transition type team, a lot of times it sets you up for open threes. And so maybe Darby believes she can work in this system. And I'm sure Kim Caldwell uh, had a one-on-one talk with all the players, and she said she told Tess Darby, "Hey, you'll fit what I'm trying to do. We can use you," and so she's staying.
Well, one of the comparisons of that, it's funny you bring that up. I'm just thinking in my head, when Bruce Pearl took over at Tennessee, I mean, Chris Lofton wasn't that athletic. He wasn't that quick, but everybody else around him was able to turn up the tempo, which allowed Chris Lofton so many open shots at three. So do you see
Yeah,
similarity there?
yeah, you're right about that. So I think you need a mix, but remember, Chris Lofton got it when that team was at its best. It was in transition, and Chris Lofton would be uh, getting open threes before the defense was even set. I go back, one of his Bruce Pearl's mentors, he was an assistant coach under Dr. Tom Davis. And I remember when he played, he had some Boston College teams. I'm going back many, many years here. And he had Boston College teams, and they pressed a lot. And some of those guys just didn't look like they could play in a pressing style game, but they fit what he was doing. It's not all about speed and quickness. It's also about knowing where you need to be and reacting in the right way to what's happening. So I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see what kind of lineup she assembles.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting that she got Alyssa Latham because you're right. Alyssa Latham is not a great 3-point shooter, but she is 6'2", and you would assume she's athletic. And her problem at Marshall, I mean, this wasn't necessarily a problem because she won that league and went to the NCAA tournament, but they got bounced out so early because I don't think she had one player over 5'9" on that team. And so to get Alyssa Latham already shows, to the question you asked a couple of weeks ago that she had the short response to, I think she is very aware that she has to go for more size at Tennessee to run this style.
Yeah, and see, again, the women's game is getting so much bigger in terms of not just popularity, but in sheer size. South Carolina has 6'7" post player, of course, this year and winning the national championship. Um, to combat teams like that, if you're going to LSU tallest starter was 6'3", Angel Reese, but a great instinctive rebounder, good defender, very quick. So you can combat that in a way, but if you have an overall lack of height, I think it will be, difficult. One of the things I'm also most curious about with her new system is she played a lot of people. She substituted a lot. And we talk more about, and people have asked more about up tempo, shooting threes, exciting, entertaining basketball. But if you're also going to play a lot of people, then recruiting becomes even more paramount, because when you interchange players, you want somebody just as good. Some of the best teams now, South Carolina is a great exception, and they play 9 people regularly, just rotate them. They're so talented. But LSU, basically a seven man team, and Gino Auriemma didn't have any choice because of injuries at Connecticut. He made the Final Four again with basically a 7 players getting virtually all of the significant minutes.
I wanted to ask you about that depth. Well, not necessarily the depth, but I agree about the depth but to your point on that, Bruce Pearl, another comparison, his deepest team at Tennessee was the one that went to the Elite Eight. Remember that team that lost Tyler Smith and lost 4 scholarship players and beat Kansas? Yeah. And so I could see that working, but so it could be interesting how that plays out. I do want to ask you about just genuine style of play, because we did have Jimmy Hyams on last Thursday, and I think we're all energetic about Danny White hiring an exciting brand of basketball for Kim Caldwell, particularly after what Tennessee Lady Vols fans have had to labor through the past few years. However, does up-tempo basketball, while it may win games and create entertainment, does it really win championships, or does the South Carolina style, is that the style that still needs to win championships? Do you need to, I guess, does the defensive rebounding still win championships, provided you recruit the talent to do it?
Well, since you bring up South Carolina, there's no style of play South Carolina couldn't implement. It could play up tempo with anybody, a lot of quick guards, shoot threes. But you did notice with South Carolina, in those rare instances where it had some difficulty, so many times it was basically unopposed on the court. But when it did struggle a little bit, what did it do? It started going inside to Cardoso, just as it did for 4 years with Aaliyah Boston. It went through the post. So ideally, you look at Connecticut in the men's game. I mean, is there really any style Connecticut couldn't have played? Good post players, it can go through them, but I mean, those guys shoot perimeter. They were athletic, so they had such a nice mixture. So I think to start off with, I think this is a good way to go. And when you talk about whom do you have to beat in the SEC in women's basketball, you have to beat South Carolina, LSU. Each has won a championship in the last 2 years. Then Texas coming into the league. It's going to be good all the time, has a great coach. Recruiting in Texas for women's basketball is terrific, so it will always be good. Those 3 teams. And are you going to beat them with just sheer talent? I don't think so. I think you have to do something a little unorthodox. And I don't know if you can win a championship with this style of play. Maybe you can. I'm sure Kim Caldwell believes you can, or she wouldn't be using this, because she's here to win championships, and this is her style of play. So did Jimmy say he didn't think you could win championships with this style?
No, he didn't say that. We actually had a pretty good conversation on it. He said that if you are trying to build something, this is a good style to go with. But once you have the talent, the more traditional way he leans towards.
Yeah, we'll look at Bruce Pearl, Caleb. When he was
Yeah,
started out at Tennessee, he didn't recruit that group of players, and he played that style. And then as he stayed here longer and had access to higher rated recruits, he went after them. And the style change, the team slowed down, and it wasn't as entertaining.
it wasn't.
I mean, I just when I think about the Bruce Pearl era and what I remember of it, the best moments were launching those threes and moving in transition, and not just Chris Lofton, but Jawan Smith and interesting players like Dane Bradshaw, who played good defensively and maybe limited in talent, but fit into Bruce Pearl's system, and just a fast moving, scrappy team. Could he have won a championship that way? Who knows? It didn't happen, but he had Ohio State down by about 18 or 20 points in a Sweet
I
16
remember
game.
that game.
Couldn't hold the lead, but that was a very talented team, Final Four bound, and he played it off its feet for a good part of the game.
Yeah, this is kind of a concern though that we've shared about Danny White's hires in general, and that they're successful with the fun brand, but can they be championship caliber? Because the same goes for Josh Heupel, runs a very high flying, exciting offense in football, but you question if that can win a championship. And John, I want to bring this up. I've brought this up before, but Josh Heupel draws comparisons to Steve Spurrier with his Spurrier's front and gun. But as you know, Spurrier only got one national title, and he backed into that national title. That was that was the most backhanded national title anybody's ever won.
Well, LSU's was back into two in 2007. Things
That's
had to go
true.
crazy with 2 losses. But the thing about Spurrier, though, he was coaching at Florida really at the wrong time, because Florida State and Miami were really good during that era too. And he played, he had to get past him, and Nebraska was a dynasty. He had really tough competition when it came to winning it all. Uh, so, and the other thing about Spurrier, if you look at the defensive talent he recruited, it's almost as though he recruited more talented defensive players than he did offense. When I think back to some of those players that he had, like Alex Brown, pretty much beat Tennessee single-handed one time, always good defensive backs. I think that's kind of the model for Josh Heupel, is to have a really good offense, but then be able to recruit talented defenses. And yeah, you'll win some high-scoring games, but you'll have defense that can make decisive game-turning plays. But we still don't know. And I wrote a column about this a few weeks ago. I think this season will tell us what the ceiling is with Josh Heupel. He's got an elite quarterback, Nico Iamaleava. Nobody doubts that. And he's got a pretty a veteran offensive line. Dylan Sampson, proven running back, solid in the receiving corps. What can he do with this? He needs to be able to make a playoff with this team. If he doesn't, then it makes me think maybe he's more a 9-3, 10-2 guy, might make the playoff, but not a championship. A championship might not be forthcoming. And I'm not saying it's make or break year, but I think it will give us a little insight into where the program could go.